There we go. Hi, I'm Lyle Gordon of Lyle Gordon Designs, and today I want to walk you through the process of making a ring. It's actually surprisingly simple. It's something you could probably actually do at home on your own, but if you don't want to do that, you can head over to my shop and buy some rings from me. So anyway, I make my rings from veneer. I use the bent wood method, and essentially I am just taking a strip of veneer like this, wrapping it around itself a whole bunch of times, gluing it together, and then shaping it into a ring. But of course, when you get veneer, it doesn't come in strips like this, and it doesn't come bent like this. It comes nice and flat in a big sheet. So first, what you'll have to do is take a blade of some kind, either a box cutter like this is what I use, or an exacto knife, or if you happen to have a veneer saw, you can use that. And you'll need a handy dandy straight edge, and you will cut them into about 1/2 inch strips. You want a strip, it of course varies from ring size to ring size, but you want a strip that's at least 10 to 12 inches long. If you have a really small ring size, you can get away with 6 to 8, but you know that's like children's rings. But anyway, once you cut your strip, then you're going to want to bend it. Now if you try to bend veneer right after you cut it, you are of course going to break it. You also want veneer that has very straight grain, because if you use a veneer that has kind of wavy, curly grain, you are going to break it. So what you'll have to do is you'll start a pot of water on the stove, get it to a boil, and then turn it down to a nice low simmer, and then dip your veneer strip into the water, well, submerge it in the water, and let it boil for about an hour. And then once it's done, you'll pull it out, you'll wrap it up onto itself like this. The tighter you can get it, the better, but be careful not to get it too tight, because some species of wood bend better than others. And so, like this one for instance, is about as tight as you can get it without breaking it. But this is fine, this is plenty. Then once you get it wrapped up, rolled up onto itself, you want to tape it with some painter's tape. Pro tip, don't use the blue painter's tape because it pulls the grain apart. You want something that's not super duper sticky, so get the lightest tape you can get. Cheap tape works best. Then you let it dry for 24 hours. And you want to make sure it's fully dry before you try and bend it, otherwise it's not going to adhere correctly. Then once it's fully dry, you have yourself a nice little bent piece of veneer like this, and you're ready to start making your ring. Now, once you're ready to start making your ring, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need some CA glue, or commonly known as super glue. You're going to need a dowel rod, and you're going to need some painter's tape. And you're also going to need some digital calipers. You could probably ballpark it and get it close, but I prefer to use digital calipers because I like to be precise. And these are about 20 bucks on Amazon, real cheap. Anyway, what you're going to do, you're going to take your dowel, wrap some painter's tape around it until you get to the exact size you want, and you will of course measure that with your calipers. Once you get it to the exact size you want, this is a size 4 that I'm making for my kids, then the fun part begins. And so what you'll do, you want something kind of heavy and thin. So I'm using my calipers right now. I usually use like a file or a heavy ruler or something. But you just want something to hold the end of the veneer down. And before you start actually wrapping it, what you're going to want to do is get you some sandpaper, preferably something around 80 to 100 grit. I'm using 120 because it's what I happen to have in the house, and I didn't feel like walking back out to the shop. You're going to take the end of your veneer and you're just going to sand it down. I've just kind of super glued this piece of sandpaper down to my cardboard here. I'm just going to kind of sand it down to a nice fine tip. And the reason for this is so that it doesn't leave a seam on the inside of the ring. And believe me, sanding it down now is going to be much easier than trying to sand that seam down later. So just take it like that, a little more. And Yeah, and I try to taper it back about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, just so it has a nice gradual taper to it. Because if you just sand the very tip down, then you're going to still wind up with a little bit of a bump in the ring. You don't want that. Not comfortable to wear. Alrighty, so that's pretty good. Okay, so now once you have your taper, this will be the end you start with. So you're going to kind of pull this out some, pull your excess out. Like I said, you want something kind of flat and heavy to hold your excess, and that's just to keep it out of your way. You don't necessarily need this, but it does make your life a lot easier. You're going to take your dowel, and you're going to start to roll the veneer onto the dowel. And you might not be able to see this very well, but you want to try and roll it as straight and tight as you can. Now, if it's not perfectly straight, that's not a huge deal, because you're going to sand the sides down anyway. This is why we keep it at about 1/2 inch, the strip. So that way you have a little bit of play to work with. Okay, and then once you get that tip rolled up in there, you're going to take your super glue and you're just going to hit it with a little dot of super glue right there where the ring is rolling. And you're just going to roll that out, and you probably can't see this, but you want to roll. You want to watch that glue spread across the surface, and then once it starts to get a little low, you just boop, another dot. Roll it a little more. Some people use CA glue accelerator for this. I don't really bother because CA glue dries so quickly. By the time I get to the end of the ring, all the stuff that came before is pretty well going to be dry, and then I just hold the ring down for 30 seconds to a minute, something like that. And then another dowel glue. And you're just going to keep going like this until you get to the end of the ring. Let's fast forward. Once you get down to the last inch or so, you can go ahead and pull it back. You don't need anything to hold it down because it's not in your way anymore. And then once you get down to the very tip, put one little dot, super glue right there on the end, and that will kind of spread across as you push it down. And you just hold it here for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then we pull it off, and hopefully you haven't glued your ring to your dowel. That happens sometimes. That's the nice thing about using painter's tape, is if that does happen, you can kind of just pull the tape off. The tape will come off, and then you can just sand that down. It's not a big deal. So now you have a blank. This is ready to be shaped into a ring. Now, normally, I do most of my shaping on a combination of my disc sander and a lathe, just with sandpaper. But actually, you could do this without any fancy equipment. All you really need is just a piece of sandpaper, glue it down to a board or a piece of cardboard that you're using and just sand away, just sand away. As you can see, it's already starting to flatten out a little bit. You're definitely going to want to use something lower grit than 120. You want probably 80 or lower for doing something like this, especially if you're hand sanding. But yeah, that's basically it. I'm not going to bother shaping this yet because the kids aren't home for me to try it out on them, and so I want to make sure it's the right size. But that's the process. It's really super simple. It's pretty fast. You can do it relatively quickly and cheaply. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You can get, thanks truck, you can get a whole pack of many different sorts of veneers from Rockler for 40 bucks, I think. That's where I got mine. And make all kinds of cool stuff. Or, if you don't feel like doing that, head over to Lyle Gordon Designs. That's etsy.com/shop/Lyle Gordon Designs. And pick up one of my rings because they're awesome. Bye!